Hello everyone, welcome to the Faculty of Emergency Nursing. Today we have a session from our recruitment series for the Leaders Programme. We are focusing on feedback after an interview, so spotlight on feedback. My name's Jeanette Welsh, I'm the Director of Education, and with me today is Judith Morgan, who's the Director of Qualifications, and we've been taking you through recruitment for those of you who've never done it before. Right, so let's make a start. You've done your shortlisting, you've done your interviews, you've taken all of our advice on board. You get to the end of the interviews, you've gone through, you've scored everything. So then there's the wash up after interviews, and this can be a little bit more tricky than everyone thinks. As an interview candidate, which is what most of you will have been so far, you think it's as easy as you did a brilliant job and you're just waiting for the interview chair to ring you and say, you were fabulous. Would you like the job? And you're all ready to say, yes, of course. But on the other side of the process, there's quite a lot more to it than that. So the first thing is all the panel members have to look at each other's scoring sheets. They have to come to an agreement about what score each interview gets. And remember, all those panel members sat through everybody's interview, so they have a better idea than anybody else how good all the answers were. You might think you were wonderful. You may not have been as wonderful as all the other candidates. There's just no way to tell. But of course, the interview chair is sitting there going, yes, 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 no, and making all those decisions. At the end, after everybody's agreed on scores, they have to make a final decision on who they're going to appoint. So is this person appointable? How many posts have we got at this level? And sometimes you have several posts, so it's no more difficult than, are they appointable? Yes, right. Well, we'll come back to how many are appointable. And then there might be a discussion about, can we have 6, not 5? Because actually 6 were appointable. When it gets to a higher level, it might be really, really important what the candidate's strengths are. So it might be that actually 3 or 4 candidates were equal to doing the job, but they would do it in a different way from each other. And it might be that the interview panel are looking at what they want achieved by the job, and they're looking for a particular approach. So it's not necessarily that you're not capable of doing the job. It might just be that you don't fit just at the moment. That can be quite an interesting discussion about which candidate do we want to offer it, because you might know something about a candidate that actually means now isn't a good time or never is a good time for that candidate. Or it might be that we've had the approach of candidates 3, 4, and 5 before, and that's getting a bit stale. What we need is someone to challenge, perhaps. And candidate 2 is high challenge. Candidate 1 is medium challenge. Which level of challenge do we want? So that might be the conversation. Once you've done that, you then have to offer it all out and see how you get on. Now, we'll need to come back to the rest of the things on this list because we want to focus on feedback today, but let's just cover off the other bits that have to be done post-interview. So obviously we need to talk to the candidates. Obviously, we need to confirm offers in writing. We need to be really clear that offers can't be absolute until we've seen the pre-employment checks. You'd like to think that we get all of this through ahead of time, but the truth is mostly we don't take up references until a decision has been made about who's the successful candidate. So people can fail at references, and I have known that to happen. It isn't a nice conversation, that feedback one. That never goes particularly well, but references can fail. Health checks can fail. I've had that conversation as well. That one doesn't go particularly well. Sometimes a candidate accepts a post, but then later withdraws, and that's a bit bewildering because then what happens? Do we start again? Do we go to the candidate who's number two but said that, had already been told they've been unsuccessful? That doesn't always work, going to candidate number two. I've seen that go wrong, but I've also seen it go really well. So that could work. But those sort of things can go horribly wrong. You may also have to do an enhanced DBS check before the person starts, and those can take a little while, but they can throw things up that you weren't expecting. And you can't take someone on with a very dodgy DBS. It's not really acceptable to say, oh, it's fine. They went to prison for drug dealing, but it's 11 years ago, so it'll be fine. No, no, it isn't. If you're going to promote or transfer an internal candidate, that's slightly easier and quicker because you don't have to wait for all of those things to happen. You can usually manage with one reference, and then there will be some sort of transfer form to move the person from one area of your organisation to another. In my organisation, we call those variation forms. You might have a different word for it, different term, but on the variation form, you simply write for payroll the changes to the cost centre that they're going to be paid for, from to the grade, if it's an increase or a sideways move, to the hours sometimes, and obviously the same sort of forms can be used for saying different, the manager's changed, or the address has changed, or something like that. Now, if they're external, then we'll need then to do some onboarding stuff and talk about start dates and induction programs and line manager and clinical supervisor, and what exactly is your induction program going to look like? Is it just the standard corporate one, or are we going to do something fancy for A&E as well? That's a whole lecture in itself, putting together the onboarding experience, because that makes a big difference to how people feel about working for you. And then, as well as that, you've got to have some sort of panel closure to make sure that the interview panel are happy, and debriefed if necessary, and capture some sort of learning. There's always something that you can learn when you're doing an interview, even if it's nothing more difficult than, do you know what, we forgot to put a jug of water in the room, didn't we? We had cups, but we didn't have a jug of water, so that wasn't very bright of us. So all of that has to happen. And there's quite a bit in there that we'll cover in feedback, but there's quite a bit that we will need to talk about slightly separately. So,
can I
please do.
Just one major point, but it's a minor point in the grand scheme of things. One of the things I think that we've omitted from the candidate communication is that if there are any conditions attached to you giving somebody the job, that it needs to be in the letters that are sent to the successful candidate.
I detect a problem has occurred at some point.
Yes.
Yes.
So you
So that would
need
be
to
the
put it in
thing.
there.
That would be things like, if you've said in the job description has some sort of qualification or is willing to undertake, then I guess within that letter you need to say you are required to take this course, and we will confirm the start date for that within 1 year or
Yeah.
whatever,
Yeah.
and you will be
Or
required to achieve it.
if you have decided that you're going to go at risk and appoint somebody on the proviso that they will have completed X within a certain amount of time, that's written in there.
Yes, I can detect a problem has arisen on that particular score. So let's all learn from that, because it's so much easier not to go through that pain. The
Yes.
pain of these things really does impress itself upon you very, very strongly when it happens. I wish we all learnt from each other's mistakes, but sadly, we seem to have to make the mistakes ourselves or have the pain ourselves. But it's
Mm.
worth a tip worth noting.
Yes.
Hmm. So, next slide, please. So, Judith, how do you go about this? I always ring the the candidate that we want to offer the job to and say, "Hello, it's me, and would you like the job?" How do you start that conversation?
Exactly the same as you, that I like to ring them first for a couple of reasons. It gets you into the communication part again of speaking with the candidates, but also if for some reason, because remember that interviews are a two-way process, so it might well be that the candidate has turned up, and even though you're very keen to have them, they may have met you and thought, well, there's no way I can work with this bunch who've been interviewing me, so
Mm,
I'm not going to accept the job. I'm going to withdraw or whatever, but hasn't got round to telling you yet. So there's always mileage in telling the person who's got the job first, so that you know that they've accepted, because it's always easier to do it that way rather than go to the candidate too and say, I'm really sorry you haven't got the job, and then having to go back to them half an hour later and say, well, actually, you can have the job now. So
yeah, that does
yes,
make you look a bit stupid, doesn't it? Yeah,
yes.
yeah.
And it's being upbeat about it, I think, and saying
Mm,
thank you. We're excited, we're really delighted that we're able to offer you the job, and that we'll be in touch shortly with how we're going to proceed. And it's giving them some information. Because I think at that point for the candidate, they're not going to take much in apart from, I've got the job.
no,
They're not going to
that's true.
remember much that you tell them. So
No.
it's about following up in writing and in process, really.
Mm. I like that conversation.
Mm.
But sadly, I've had far fewer of those conversations than I have of the, unfortunately, I'm terribly sorry you didn't get the job. Um,
Mm.
but I do like that conversation, and I think it's really nice to have a very positive conversation with them. I like to be able to say something else, something along the lines of "You did really well," or "We were really impressed with you," or "Really, we really liked your approach to whatever it was," or "We we were
You're
so
making a
pleased." Yeah,
brilliant addition to the team.
yeah, that sort of thing. Or, I always like to find something that was of interest, um, particularly liked your commitment to whatever or your passion for this shone through, that sort of thing. Um, it's a positive strokes conversation, isn't it, really? And,
Yes.
you know, I
Yeah.
think I would also say to people, just give yourself that time and space. I do like with feedback to be on my own. I don't like anybody else in the same space as me when I'm making that phone call, so that I'm focused on the person on the other end of the phone call and I'm not being distracted by anybody else hovering and hovering around in
Yeah.
my background. Um, so that I can
I
just
think
give
that's
my
so
entire
important.
attention to that.
And you're not going to be interrupted, because there's nothing worse being
Oh
halfway
no.
through the phone call and somebody interrupts you. So it's about putting that do not disturb sign on the door.
Mm. So that's the really positive one, and I really love it when you get a squeal of excitement down the line.
Mhm.
Yeah, I thought I'd messed up. No, you were really good. We were very impressed. I love that. It's probably the best bit of recruitment, that phone call. Unfortunately, there's always more. Well, I say always. There's rarely is it that I've only had one person to interview, and it was just, are they appointable or aren't they? Um, so of course you've got more phone calls to say, nah, not you, not today. Um,
And
now,
I have interviewed where I've not given anybody the post.
oh, now that's a very good point, actually,
Mm.
Judith. My advice to seniors, and this might sound a bit cheeky, but whenever seniors are interviewing for a senior post, if I happen to see the person or anybody who's on going to, not just the chair, but anyone on the panel, I will always say to them, good luck. Please do not be afraid not to appoint if none of the candidates are what you're looking for.
Mm.
I don't direct them towards any candidate if I know who the candidates are. I simply say never be afraid not to appoint. It's a pain because the recruitment process can be so prolonged, but it's so much worse to appoint the wrong person. So much worse.
For them and for you.
Oh, for everybody
Yeah.
imaginable. Um, I think we can all tell horror stories of appointments that went wrong, um, or potentially went wrong, and it's just getting rid of anybody. I mean, quite rightly, employment legislation does make it very difficult for you to just get rid of people for no particular reason, and that's good. But you can be stuck with the wrong person for a very, very long time. And meanwhile, there's a lot of disruption in the team, and that's not helpful. Anyway, let's look at how we nicely let people down. Um, I don't think there's a way that people don't know that it's bad news. Do you, Judith? I mean, no matter
Um,
how you start the conversation, I've never had people get the wrong end of the stick as I've started, so there must be something in my tone when I say, "Hello, Judith, it's Jeanette. It's Jeanette Welsh." And I think at some point there's something, and I don't know what it is, that just lets Judith know she didn't get the job today.
I sometimes depending on who it is and how much of a rapport you've built with them, I may sometimes start with who you are, obviously, but then say, I'm really sorry, but I've got some disappointing news for you. So
Mm,
it makes it clear from the outset
mm.
that, it's not good news then.
I agree. I think actually it's better to put that front and center. It's like a difficult diagnosis, isn't it?
Mm.
Um, and I also think don't drag it out. Wrap the conversation up really quickly. I vividly remember a colleague telling me what it was like to be diagnosed with cancer. She said after the word cancer, she heard not a single other syllable. She said she felt like she suddenly went numb and froze. And she could see that the doctor was still talking. Uh, and she could hear there was noise, but she couldn't hear a word that was said. And
And I
I think
remember,
not getting a
yeah,
job is a bit in the similar vein.
yeah. And I remember being with a doctor who had broken bad news that this lady's husband had died. And after he went out of the room, she turned to me and said, "So is he still alive?"
Mm,
Because of the words that he used, didn't say that I'm really sorry your husband's died.
yeah,
It
so
wasn't
so
clear.
important. Yeah, I know. I remember working with a chaplain on sudden death and how we approached that sudden bereavement really rather than sudden death. Um, and he always told the story of an elderly gentleman who, when told very kindly and considerately that we'd lost his wife, the gentleman just turned around and said, "Lost her? Do you mean lost her? How do you lose someone that ill?" And then the doctor had to go, "No, no, no, sorry, I mean, she's died." "Well, then say died. Don't just say lost her." And I mean,
Yeah,
right, okay. If someone in that moment could say that, I think the same actually applies, because it's a far lesser thing to be
yeah,
told you didn't get a job, far less than to be told that
yes,
your spouse has died. Um, but I think just get it out. Just get it out and say, "I'm really sorry. We're not we're not going to be offering you the job. Um, I'm very happy to offer you feedback. But I guess today isn't going to be the day for that. So I'll make contact with you in a day or two to arrange it."
yeah. And I know we've got the words on there of please don't be discouraged. I'll be honest, there have been a couple of times where I've interviewed people and I'm thinking to myself, please be to God you never apply for another A&E post. So in some ways, you want to discourage them because they just. I'll give you an example. We interviewed one nurse who turned around and said, "Well, you know, the mental health patients are difficult, and you may feel you want to turn around and punch them." So that was a big red flag of, oh dear.
Hmm. Hmm.
Mm.
Yes.
Please
But
don't
so,
apply for another
well,
nursing
well,
post
you
in Leamington.
can, but you might need to just have changed your
Mm.
attitude before you do. And
Yeah,
honestly, changing your attitude isn't difficult. You just
no.
have to decide to do it.
No. And the difficulty, I think, with some of the Breaking Bad news is when the candidate really feels that they've done so well and they are going to be given the job because they are the outstanding one.
Uh, to which I always respond, you didn't see the other five candidates and you didn't hear their answers to the same questions we asked you.
No.
If you had, you would also have made the same decision as us.
Yeah. Or
And I,
it's the internal candidate who feels that they deserve to have the post because they've been doing the job.
absolutely, they think they've been doing the job. Um,
Mm.
Now, sometimes they have, but actually,
Yes.
what I what I've said for years, and I am a bit bored of my own voice on this one, but nevertheless, it doesn't make it untrue, is actually the next grade up is not a prize or a reward for doing really well in your current job. You
No.
could be absolutely brilliant at what you're doing. Now, for me, I can completely understand why you might want to give someone a bonus or something like that for being really good at their job. However, that doesn't mean you'll be really good at the next grade up because the next grade up is a different job. And I think a lot of people come adrift at that. Getting a band
Oh,
six is not a reward for being a brilliant
no.
band five.
And there's also something in the fact that although they may be brilliant at the role they're at, and they potentially have got the capability to be brilliant at the post above, because they feel that they are going to get the post because it's theirs to have, that they don't prepare in the same way, and
Mm,
that they come in with an expectation rather than coming in thinking I'm prepared for this role.
mm.
Yeah, and to me,
It's
I think that if you're going to do a role, then you almost need to be working at that level before you apply for it.
mm. I've often found it rather strange that we train people to do a role after they've been given it.
Mm.
Whereas, and I always use the contrast of the police, where you can't have the next level up until you've done the course for the next level up. So you can't have a sergeant's post until you've done the sergeant's course. You can't have an inspector job till you've done the inspector
Of
course.
course.
And if there isn't an inspector course comes up, well, then you can't be an inspector. Um, and I think while that would be very difficult to make happen in nursing, there is something for me about teaching you to do the job before you get that far, because you might not like it. You might have been really happy doing what you were doing, really brilliant at it. And then you get another job and you think, I hate this. I absolutely hate this. Why did I want it? And to go back is really hard, especially if you've moved area and moved everything else as well. So um, for me, there's an awful lot to be said about teaching you what that job entails and teaching you to do that job before you get there.
Do you know what comes to my mind as you're speaking now is that we have done, or you rather, have done an awful lot of work on the leaders program, on getting the sessions that individuals need to step up to the challenge of the next grade up, or to consolidate if they're already working at that level but never had the opportunity to have the study. And even going through the leaders program and completing the evaluations, even if you don't have a qualification there, you will be so much more advanced just by sitting and watching the
Mm,
webinars and doing your reflection on what you've learned and how it's changed you, and also getting the practical assessments completed,
mm,
some ESLIs or
absolutely.
whatever, so that you've got constructive feedback about your performance.
It's unquestionably useful to have
Yes.
things done and taught in advance,
Mm.
unquestionably. And
Yeah.
it will give you the chance. I often find when people are coming up to, they feel like they're ready for a band six post, they don't know whether to go trainee nurse practitioner or band six nurse in charge operational role. Um, the two are not the same, and it's difficult sometimes to choose which to do. So actually, for me, there's something about learning the operational role by doing our leaders program, um, and deciding how much of that you really like and or you don't, and making that decision at that point rather than
I
getting
come by that.
stuck.
I come from that from a slightly different angle.
Mm,
Because in my consultant nurse role, then we were training up emergency nurse practitioners and they were being trained up from band five. And I think what we found was those that had only attained a band five role and hadn't gone into that sister charge nurse role, they were then expected within the minor injury unit to do the management aspect of things.
hmm
And that's where some of them struggled because they hadn't had that more senior experience, and now they were having to do it on the hoof, really.
And
So
that's
I
difficult.
think, and I, so
So
I think,
maybe you should always give a go at a operational six before you move into
uh,
a specialist post.
yeah. I mean, I
Mm.
remember the conversations we used to have where you should have got ward experience before you come into
Yes,
A&E. And there's still some mileage in that, and I think that there is mileage in do a band six and then go into a
then
um,
take the
the
sideways move into
autonomous
trainee
practice.
practitioner.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I would, because that experience will be invaluable, and it's really hard to go back and get it once you're in that position.
it is.
So
It's very hard.
yeah,
It's like going back to get A levels if you didn't get them in sixth form, really.
yes,
It's
yeah,
hard. Um,
yeah,
Next slide. Ah, good. I was going to say, now we need to talk about
the
this. Now,
feedback.
I've done countless ones of these, countless. They always seem to send, in my educator post, it always seemed to be me that got sent off to do feedback, to the unsuccessful internal candidates. Dear knows why I always got that job, but I did. Anyway, so I've done this loads and loads of times. So absolutely key, private, uninterrupted, and you can't be clock watching. So if it takes an hour, it takes an hour. If it's going to take longer, it takes a bit longer. Um, if you're done and dusted in 5 minutes, well, I'd be surprised. Um, but it does need just a bit of space. You can't leave it too long. You need to get in quick. Um, I've managed, when I've got given feedback, I've always managed to do it quickly. However, when I've been receiving feedback, when I haven't got a job, I've always found that's been very slow. And I don't know exactly what that's about, but I suspect it's about those interviewers having more pressured diaries than I had, because actually it's really important to get in there and get in there as quickly as possible, just not on the day of the interview. Um, I think it's really hard. I'm looking at the list there and I'm thinking, I'm just going to jump to number 7 and go, the conversation I have with somebody who has not got a job. It's not a conversation I ever share. So that conversation never gets reported, it never gets written down. But there will always be some similar elements, and one of them will always be this job is not a reward for being good at what you're currently doing. So that will always be said. But then actually it's about what people have done differently. And I think what might illustrate this best is if I give a couple of examples. So I had one interview candidate who just could not focus and give a straight answer to the question. So you'd ask a question and they'd go off all sorts of, rambles round here and round there, almost like a dog going to sniff at every lamppost and bush on the way round their walk. And I thought, well, I don't know, absolutely random. Um, doesn't appears to come across as prepared. But if they have prepared, then they've got the wrong end of the stick and it doesn't make sense. Anyway, so I went to the person, I said, so how did you feel that went? Now I'm a bit reluctant to do that because it always kind of puts the onus on the person to say, oh well, it's rubbish. But at the same time, you need to get a little bit of a feel of what they thought was going on. And the first thing she came out with was, I'm absolutely hopeless at interviews. I said, oh, okay, fine. Well, what preparation did you do? What were you looking at for doing your presentation? And then what had you thought about in terms of what questions we might ask you? So she took me through that and I thought, well, that seems all right. She doesn't seem to have got too far off the wrong end of the stick. But she just could not deliver an interview. Anyway, we didn't offer the job because that was why I was doing the feedback. But in the event, the person who we did offer the job to pulled out after 2 weeks. So I went back to this lady and I said, look, I take on board everything you've said in the feedback. And I take on board that your interview was really rubbish, but the successful candidates pulled out. Would you like to give this a go? Because I said, I think you'd be good at the job, but I think you're just not very good at interviews. Do you know what? She has absolutely flourished in the job. She's been brilliant, but she was a very slow start. And I did just wonder, just like some people can't do exams, some people really struggle in interviews. And it doesn't matter what you say, they just, the stage fright seems to be overwhelming and all the ideas go fleeing out the door.
I do pre-interview prep planning with them. And I think one of the biggest things that they get into is to rote learn answers,
Mm,
but they rote learning answers for questions they don't know is coming up.
mm.
And that is always a difficulty because they then having to try to answer a question from a different perspective than what they planned for.
That's
So
a very good point,
I
actually.
think a
Yeah.
lot of it is in the prep work, where if I tend to tell them all to go through each of the points in the job description to mind map or brainstorm it, and then come up with 3 or 4 key points that if they were asked a question on that specific point, what would they like to have? So for each of those points, then they've got 3 or 4 at their fingertips that they can talk about. The only ones I would tell them to maybe rote learn or have some of a more construct answer to is what are your weaknesses and what do you think your strengths are, which are
Mm.
often the leading questions, aren't they,
So it,
to
it depends. It depends what level the interviews are at,
yeah.
because
Mm.
very, very often you won't get those sort of questions at lower levels. Um,
Yeah,
I don't like, I've got to be honest, I don't like the what are your weaknesses question.
yeah,
I think
Or what are
That's
your learning needs?
yes, that's better.
What are
If
your
I would rather be asked, and this is a personal thing, I don't know how you'd feel about it. Um, but personally, I would rather be asked, if we gave you this job, what would you need to learn? And I think that that gives me as the potential employer an idea of where their starting point is, and it gives them a chance to say, my time management's up the Swanee or whatever, um, without saying it's a weakness. I mean, it is,
yeah,
but
yeah,
it's a developmental need.
yeah,
It isn't something that's a
yeah.
derailer necessarily.
Well, it doesn't have to be a derailer, does it? But it's
No.
about and them recognizing what their learning needs are and what they need to improve on.
Mm.
So, yeah,
But
so
it
that's
is a difficult one. And then I think actually the strengths question can be quite difficult as well. Because if I was American, I might find it a bit easier because Americans seem to have no problem with telling you what they're good at. Um, there must be something about being British that, you can't you can't say what you're good at because that would just
although I
make you look
suppose
like a
you can
big kid.
ask, you can phrase it in a different way, can't you? Of
Yeah.
if I was to ask your colleagues why they like working with you, what
What
would
would
they
they
tell
say?
me?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. That's
You
a nicer
know,
way. Yeah. And that is a
mm,
much easier way of doing it. What three words would other people use about you? That's
yeah,
quite nice because then it's not about you puffing off
no,
your strengths. But I think your point about potentially rote learning answers is a good one. I have seen someone do that in an interview, and I often say in feedback, look, it's not an exam. So if you want to take notes in with you, do. I wasn't really then expecting her to come back to the next interview with a script. It's like, I didn't give
yeah,
you the questions in advance, did I?
no,
So how have you written yourself a script?
no,
And that's a bit
yes,
much. Um, but some very good feedback. Well, it wasn't feedback to me, but I'd seen someone for feedback, and I think I'd seen her twice because she just wasn't cutting it through the interview, and she went and saw someone else for interview prep, and that person said, right, all you do is you write on your hand the letters P, S, and T. And it doesn't matter what the question is, you make darn sure you make sure there's something in your answer about the patient, there's something in your answer about staff, and there's something in your answer about the trust. Now, in England, everything's called a trust. In Wales, it's a board. So, whatever letter works for you. But you have to talk about how this, whatever it is, the topic affects the patient, how it affects the staff, how it affects the organisation. And if you've done that for every answer, you've probably nailed it. And she went to the next interview and did exactly that and passed. And I was so pleased. And she's doing brilliantly. She's in a band 7 post now and doing really, really well. But she nailed it. So that was the right feedback for her at that time.
yeah.
Um,
And I think there's something there as well about currency, isn't there?
mm,
Because if somebody comes in and they're not up to date with what the the currency of the practice today is, or they're living on yesteryear, and also being far too narrow focused rather than being broad. Now,
I
that
see.
doesn't mean that um, that you're not concise with your answers, but it's about if you were going for a band 6 post, then you're expecting somebody to be a bit broader minded than somebody who's at a band 5. It's about filling those requirements, and that's where you really need to scrutinize the job description and the person spec to see what you're
Mm,
expected to meet in that.
mm. I think what has often struck me is that how many people who are not yet ready for a promotion think that the way they are doing things currently is the only way to do things.
Mm,
I see it particularly in people who've only worked in one clinical area, that that is the way things are done. That's the way things should be done. That's the way things have always been done. That's the way they should be done going into the future. And you only have to go to another organisation to find that it's just done very differently. And some of that's about the patients, some of that's about the internal geography of your organisation. Sometimes it's about the history of your organisation. Sometimes it's about the external geography. You know, whether you've got mountains or sea or neither. If you've got big motorways or big lakes, all that sort of thing. Um, it can, and what your industry is. So what's the demographics of your population and what did they used to do before that industry closed down, or um, what do they do? What have they always done? That sort of thing. That makes a big difference to the mindset of the people working in the organization and the people who are the patients. So it's useful to be exposed to that. So if you do have the opportunity to go and work somewhere else on a swapsies with somebody as a developmental option, it's well worth it just to go and see that, oh, it isn't always the same everywhere. It's
Yeah.
really well
Do you,
worth doing.
do you know, going back to giving feedback, the other thing I think sometimes it helps is if you've got your notes from the interview with you, because
Always,
you can
always
give
you can give concrete
specific
examples.
yes of what you were looking for, and why maybe that answer fell or could have been managed better, I should say,
Mm.
rather than why it failed.
Mm. I do think it largely boils down to the good old 1920s advice for exams, which is please answer the question you have been asked, not the question you think you have been asked.
Yes.
So if I ask you, what time does it say on the clock? I would quite like you to say 8 minutes past 10. I don't want you to tell me about how to construct a clock face.
And that I think is where this business of rote learning answers, so that when you're asked a question on something, you give the rote answer you've learned.
Mm,
And I think that comes back round to that, to that's why people go down that rabbit hole.
mm. And then there's always that moment, isn't there, that, you've then got to tell the team and manage the team and there's how are we going to what would you like me to say about about the fact you didn't get this job? Um, what would you like me to say to the team? How would you like me to tell them if you're an internal candidate? Or would you like to deal with it? But this conversation is private. What we have had in this conversation is completely private. Um, and once we're out of this space, I'm going to treat you, internal candidate, exactly as I did before, and other people won't notice any difference. Because I think you can't you can't crush people just because they didn't do very well on the day in an interview.
Do you know the other thing that's just come to mind for me, going through this, is that on occasion, it's sometimes the interview panel or member has been at fault by asking multiple questions at the same time. So then the candidate themselves may not have picked up on that and not gone back and said, okay, I've answered the first part of your question. Can you remind me what the second part is? So it's about developing them in their interview skills as well to say, look, you know, if this happens, then you're okay to do X, Y, and Z
Mm.
about it.
Yeah,
Because
it's
it
okay to
can be,
say that.
yeah.
Mm.
Yeah. So it's
And
about picking up on that as well.
and some interviewers are just frankly not very good at it. Um,
No.
so you're not wrong. I'm particularly unkeen on vague multi-clause questions where you think really this requires a 5,000 word essay of a philosophical nature. It doesn't require a 10-minute, well, not even a 10-minute, a 2-minute summary, executive summary highlight because it's not going to work. So some people just ask the most bizarre questions. Um, You probably don't want to work for them, to be
Mhm.
fair.
No. I do remember giving feedback to one person that came to interview, and there was an interview panel of four, so it must have been a band six, band seven position or whatever. And what I noticed when the first interviewer had asked the questions was this person kept changing their body language to mirror the person asking the questions. Well,
How interesting, but very off-putting.
I was the third interviewer, so I changed my position for every single question. And this individual was not subtle in trying to mirror body language. So that was very interesting feedback when they didn't get the post.
But I wonder what they'd been advised, because they'd obviously been advised to mirror the body language of your
Yeah,
interviewer. And I,
but they'd
I
left
was,
out the word subtle.
yes, yes. Um, but it is interesting how things are interpreted, isn't it?
Mm,
I always think it's very
yeah,
important to answer the person who's asking you the question. So if I'm being asked a
yes.
question by an interviewer, I will focus on them and I won't look at the other interviewers.
Mm,
Um, but different people do things differently.
yeah.
So it's interesting.
But he
Anyway,
was crossing his legs, he was opening up. It was,
yeah, but then that was just you having a bit of fun with a candidate
oh,
who'd had been given some strange things. Anyway, um, there we go. So
yeah.
next slide, please. So there are always
Mm,
issues about the decisions you make. I've been the internal candidate and I've been the external candidate. Um, it can be really tricky. As the external candidate, you have to deal, when you come in, you have to deal with internal candidates being irritated. Now, very often when you're in the management structure, you don't notice internal candidates being particularly disappointed or annoyed or anything until the person who was appointed starts. And it's at that point that the initial, the internal disappointments or annoyances really kick in. And those can be managed a variety of ways. It's not helpful if the external candidate arrives with a big bang and hello, I'm here to save the world. That's not going to go well. Um, but just worth noting that as you try to manage internal disappointed candidates, that disappointment might not show up straight away. And simmering resentment can brew. Um, but hey, we've all got to be grown up about these things.
it doesn't only come from the individual either, it can come from the team.
No,
It
it's
can come
weird
very
that,
much
isn't
from the
it?
team because
It's
they were
really weird.
expecting or they feel that that individual is up to doing that role and you are held to account, oh, rightly so held to account for the decision you made. And then there's that disappointment that their colleague hasn't been given it and you've given it to an external one.
Again,
Or you've given it to the wrong internal one in
or
their
again,
mindset.
had you been in the interview and
Mhm.
heard the answers that all the candidates gave, you may have come to a similar conclusion to
Conclusion.
us.
Yeah.
And being really good at your current job does not mean you are necessarily going to be really good at the next job. Um,
But
I'm
that's
sorry
if
to
they say
sound,
it to
I'm
you.
sorry to sound like a cracked record, but you're not
But
wrong.
that
People don't, they often don't. Um, but hey, have you ever had your decision challenged, or have you ever had to challenge the decision of an interview panel about who they wanted to appoint?
I've been in an interview panel where I've challenged who they were going to appoint during the interview, but we've always come to amicable agreement by the end of it. Um, I've I can't recall ever having anybody taking anything through any process as a result of interviewing them?
Mm.
Oh,
Unfortunately, I have had this
mm,
problem. Um, and actually, it was me that made the challenge. I wasn't being
mm,
interviewed for the post, so I'll just put that out there.
mm,
But uh, I was told about an appointment for a post, and I knew something about the candidate that the interview panel didn't know.
mm,
So I had to seek an um, what do you call it, a one-to-one, a
mm,
quick meeting with the interview panel chair and say, I have severe concerns about your decision, and these are my concerns.
mm.
Would you please take those into consideration? Fortunately, and this is where thank God for employment processes and recruitment processes, which are just a nightmare a lot of the time, and you think, oh, really, this is just annoying. But thank God for them because um, the references caught it. So the person hadn't given references for the last 5 years. They'd only given them for the last two. Um, and so actually recruitment caught it and said, very sorry, candidate, we will require references for 5 years, not just two. So please could you supply those? Um, those were supplied and that provided the information that I had provided um, to the interview chair. I didn't have to provide it as a reference, but the interview chair got it through recruitment formally, simply because recruitment were following their processes, and that actually meant that that appointment didn't have to go ahead, which was
But that's where you've got to put your
absolute godsend.
professionalism outset front and
Completely,
centre, haven't you?
completely. That was so hard. It's really hard to challenge and to say, I'm really worried about the decision you've made, especially when you're saying it to someone more senior. And it can't be because you didn't appoint my friend, because that's just loyalty to your friend, which is fine, but means you've got blinkers on. Um, but
Unless
it's
you've
very
got
difficult.
reasonable cause and you were being very objective about your friend.
Yes, but even then, you haven't
Yeah,
seen all the other candidates, have you?
no,
So
no.
if you're thinking that somebody shouldn't have been appointed, that's an individual person thing. If you think that somebody else
Yeah.
should, then
Oh no, 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 no. You
that's
can't.
you
That's
can't
you
say that.
can't do that.
You
I mean, you
can't say
can
that.
you can question why wasn't I appointed, and I want,
Ah, but then
you
that's
know,
asking for feedback.
be back.
And
Yes.
and honestly, I had the great honour to be asked to be part of a stakeholder panel for a very senior post. I didn't expect to be asked. It never crossed my mind I would be, but I was asked to represent my organisation on this stakeholder panel. And therefore, we saw all the candidates for this really senior post. And I sat there thinking, well, I don't know. I don't really know. I mean, fortunately, I'm not the interview panel, so I don't have to make the decision. But obviously, we had to have some conversations with every candidate just to kind of get a feel and see what we thought, which was lovely. And as I say, a real honour to be asked. Um, but what I was struck with was that all of those candidates could have done that job. They were all capable of doing the job. Which is why I said earlier that, sometimes it's your style of doing the job and your approach and what approach and what style is needed now with the current issues that higher management are aware of, um, compared to maybe 10 years ago or maybe 5 years' time. Um, who is the right person in the moment? Um, and that had a very powerful effect on me because it made me feel a lot better about all the jobs I was never appointed for, and there's more jobs I wasn't appointed for than I was appointed for. But it made me feel a lot better about that because I realised that actually sometimes Now is not the right time for you. Now is not the right time for you to do that job. That job might not be the right fit for you. Um, Now might not be the right person, everything has to be lined up for it to be right. And sometimes it's just not.
Mm.
And that may not be a bad thing for whatever reason. Um, Sometimes one has to be a little bit fatalistic about it and go, okay, that's the decision. We'll go with it. And sometimes you have to make a decision. I was on an interview panel and everyone was getting really carried away with this candidate and really swept up in this candidate's enthusiasm. And I went, yeah, I think we're going to have real difficulties. I'm not saying that this person couldn't do the job, but I'm telling you, there is a lot of learning to do before they'll be able to do the job effectively. A lot of learning. And everyone said, "Oh, Jeanette, don't rain on the parade. This will be amazing." And I said, "Well, I'm telling you, that's what I think." Um, and Jeanette's ended up having to train the person to do the job because there's so much that they didn't know, and I'd picked up that knowledge deficit. Doesn't mean that they didn't and couldn't do the job well. It's simply that knowledge deficit can be huge sometimes. Um, which can then throw out team dynamics because then you kind of, how am I going to manage this within the current team? And that might be another reason for someone not getting a job or someone getting the job, that actually they'll fit beautifully with what I've got at the moment. And I always say to candidates, I appoint for difference. I don't appoint for sameness. I want variety and I want difference in the team. I don't want to end up with everybody doing things identically because that, although it's easier to manage, quite frankly, um, it's it's a bit boring and it doesn't move the organisation or the department on. You always need someone who's the social organiser, don't you, Judith? The department without the person who's up for signing folks up for the Christmas party is a really rather tedious department. Um, but equally, you need people who are going to be going along, checking in on the team, and people coming up with ideas, and people trying to make ideas work, and what have you. So, um, often I'll be looking for difference, and maybe your candidate on this occasion was a duplicate of what you got already. You didn't need a duplicate of that. But
Mm.
still, anyway, Judith, talk to us about managing candidate relations.
Yeah, you caught me on the hop there now.
Should we talk about
Yes,
bias instead then? Should we
yeah.
talk about bias first?
Yes, let's talk about perception bias. Yes, it's about recognizing your own bias, isn't it? When one, when you're interviewing, two, when somebody starts in post. And it's about getting them on board and doing your best for somebody, really, isn't it? And I think there's something in there of having the belief that individuals doing the best that they can with the information they've got available at that particular point in time makes it that much easier to manage. And also having that open communication where if there is an issue, somebody can come and see you. Yeah. And I must admit, being a consultant nurse, one of the my things, like you, a mantra of interviewing was, well, I can't be a consultant nurse if I'm not open to consultations.
No, indeed.
So you'd always
That's a good
invite
point.
people in, and I'd always try to have my door open as much as I could and would only close it. There would be two reasons why I'd close my door. One is if I needed to be doing something that was confidential, and the other one was if if I was doing something where I really had to maintain focus and try to minimize the noise around me, such as having your heads in an Excel spreadsheet where you had to make sure that your numbers and things were correct. That doesn't mean people couldn't come in and disturb you, but they were less likely to if your door was shut.
Yeah,
So
they're required to knock.
yes. So I think it is about recognizing the perception bias and what the perception bias that can happen in people that are on the shop floor as well. Yeah.
Mm,
And I suppose going on then to managing candidate relations, um, that can be an interesting one if you've got three people in your department and all three went for the same job, and maybe one got it, or maybe two got it and the third one didn't. It's about how do you make it an easy transition between the three of them, and how do you I suppose it's about how do you get the best out of them afterwards, and how do you make them all feel valued?
mm. I think there's a lot to be said for just grasping that nettle straight off
Yeah.
and having them all in and saying, right, now, I'm really sorry. I know you all three wanted the job, but there was only one job available. And on the day, this person was the best. Um, Sometimes I've seen people do it as acting posts and kind of rotating things between three internal candidates. I find that doesn't work very well. It it sounds like it's fair. Doesn't work very well. Um,
No.
they end up with 4 months each, and everybody, out of a year or something, and everybody
And then
gets
they've got to go back.
yeah, and it confuses people. So I'm not a big fan of that way of
No,
managing it.
no.
I'm more inclined to manage it. I like to manage things upstream. I'm a big fan of um, expectation management and actually facing that one off before they've applied. Job coming up. Do you want to consider applying? Just remember, other people will as well. And I don't particularly want you all falling out over this matter. So can you organise yourselves now and come to an agreement? If you want to, if you want to apply, you're very welcome to apply. Um, and your application will be treated exactly the same way as anyone else's. We probably won't know who you are because your name won't be on it. So although we know you, if all six of you apply, or all one time I had 18 people in applying for band six, and I think most of them were internal. You know, you have to understand from the get-go, there's one post, there's four of you going for it, and you have no control over what external candidates might apply. So could you just get over that now and agree that whatever the outcome, you are not going to bring it to work because we can't be having you falling out with people at work. It's deeply unprofessional. Got to get on with the job. Doesn't always work, but I'm always inclined to grasp that nettle as early as possible. Stings less then.
Yeah. Yes, and it's about for the unsuccessful candidates as well, maybe coming up with a learning needs analysis and giving them some education that will help them get up to the level that they were expected to be at. Or it might be there, as you say, they might already be at that level, but they haven't had that experience or they haven't delivered that experience in the interview and were
Mm,
pipped at the post for it.
mm. And it is hard. There's no question about it. It is hard if it's a job you've been wanting for ages and it comes up and you go for it and you mess up. It's really hard. Um, and so probably there's something there about being kind to yourself because you didn't get it quite right. Um, but
And
it's
Jeanette,
really hard.
let's be honest, there are some interview panels who haven't been, as I can put my hand on my heart and say, for all the interviews I've done and aim to be fair and give the best candidate the post. You know, there are some people who will have allowed their biases into their interviewing, and there are people out there who will have been subjected to their bias and not got posts because of it.
Oh,
And
absolutely. Totally agree.
you know,
Some people, I've noticed some interview panels have a very fixed idea about what they think will work. Um, when interview panels have a very fixed idea of what will work, it usually comes off the rails,
yes,
and that's
yeah.
just a bit annoying. But it comes off the rails, and off we go, round we go again. Um, and
And
if
I
you've
suppose
if
there's
you've
something,
developed the internal candidates in the interim, actually they're in a better position to conclude,
yeah,
aren't they?
yeah. And in some ways, sometimes it's a blessing you didn't get the job because
Yes.
I don't mean it nastily. I mean it's
No.
that if I didn't get the job, then it might be because I couldn't work with these people, and then you find yourself in a difficult position
I
trying to juggle that.
you're so right. I had a fabulous coaching conversation with someone once who said, Jack, do you want to work for these people? And I went, no. She said, well, don't apply for the job then. And I thought,
Mm.
yeah, that's really good advice. That is
Because the
such good
interview's
advice.
two-way, isn't it? It's a
Yeah, it's just like if
two-way
you don't
interview
want to work for
process.
these people, just don't.
No.
Just
And the
don't.
other thing is, or as an interviewer, you may find that the integrity of maybe another panel member isn't what it should be. And unfortunately, you've got to put that professional hat on and you've got to do something about it. It's expected of you
Mm,
as as a professional nurse.
mm, mm. Anyway,
Mm,
so musings on how to give feedback
yeah.
and what the purposes of that are, and just thinking about how that all impacts on future team or current team or both. So I hope that's been of some use, and we'll see you for the next one we do. Thank you.